There is a photograph from December 15th, 1995. A man stands outside the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. He is 31 years old. He is flanked by two lawyers, one on each side, both in dark suits, both smiling broadly at the cameras. The man in the middle is smiling too, not the professional smile of someone managing a public moment, a real smile. The kind that arrives when something you have carried for 5 years is finally, definitively over. His name is Jean-Marc Bosman. At the moment this photograph was taken, he was a midfielder for CS Vise, a small club in the lower divisions of Belgian football. He had not played at the top level in 5 years. His marriage had ended. He had almost no money. He had spent the previous half-decade being told, by clubs, by lawyers, by football governing bodies, by UEFA itself, that he was wrong and they were right. He was not wrong. What the court had just decided would transfer billions of dollars in power from football clubs to football players. It would reshape every major league in Europe. It would create the modern transfer market, the one with the January windows, the free agent signings, the agents negotiating signing bonuses for players whose contracts are about to expire. Every player in this World Cup carries something of what Bosman built. Almost none of them know his name. Before 1995, football clubs owned their players, not metaphorically, functionally, legally. If a club decided to retain a player's registration, the piece of paper that said you were their player, there was almost nothing that player could do about it. You could refuse to play. You could refuse to train. You could tell them you wanted to leave, and the club could simply say no and reduce your wages while you waited, and refuse to release you to any club that hadn't paid the transfer fee they decided to ask for. The fee was set by the selling club, not negotiated, not agreed between parties, set by the people who were holding you. A player could reach the final day of his contract, be told his services were no longer wanted, and still be unable to leave, because the club demanded a transfer fee from whoever came for him. And if nobody met that fee, he simply stayed, earning reduced wages, going nowhere. This was not an anomaly. This was the system, and it had operated this way, with minor variations, since the Football League introduced it in England in 1885. For over a century, footballers, the people whose skill, whose physical sacrifice, whose specific and irreplaceable talent made the entire industry possible, were the one thing the industry treated as property. In the early 1990s, Premier League clubs were also permitted to field a maximum of 3 foreign players in any match. 3. In a starting 11 of 11, French players could not freely come to England, Spanish players could not freely go to Germany, Dutch players could not freely go to Italy. Talent was fenced by nationality as well as by contract. Nobody in the corridors of UEFA saw anything wrong with this. Jean-Marc Bosman was not a star. He was born in Liège, Belgium, in 1964. He progressed through the Standard Liège Youth Academy, made the first team, represented Belgium at under-21 level. He was solid, capable, useful, the kind of midfielder every functioning squad needs, and nobody builds statues of. In 1988, he signed for RFC Liège on a 2-year contract worth around £66,000. He did well enough, scored 1 goal, won the Belgian Cup in his second season. When that contract expired in 1990, he was 25 years old, prime age for a professional footballer. RFC Liège wanted to offer him a new deal. They were willing to pay him roughly a quarter of what they'd been paying him. Bosman said no. A French second division club called Dunkirk made him an offer he wanted to accept. A better wage, a proper role, a chance to play regularly. Bosman told RFC Liège he was leaving. The club said, fine, but Dunkirk must pay a transfer fee of approximately €500,000. Dunkirk did not have €500,000 to spend on a midfielder from the Belgian First Division. The deal collapsed. And then RFC Liège who had just told Bosman they didn't want him, cut his wages by 75% because they could, because there was no mechanism in the system that prevented it. Bosman later described this as the moment he became a freedom fighter, not the moment he decided to become one, the moment he was made one, by the sheer grinding illogic of being told simultaneously that you are not wanted and that you cannot leave. It was illogical, he said simply. His lawyers were two Belgians named Luc Misson and Jean-Louis Dupont. They told Bosman at the outset that the case might take 2 weeks. It took 5 years. The argument was not complicated. The 1957 Treaty of Rome guaranteed freedom of movement for workers throughout the European community. Jean-Marc Bosman was a worker. He was a Belgian citizen trying to work in France. He had a job offer. His employer was blocking it by demanding a payment from his prospective new employer. A payment Bosman himself had no obligation to make, had not agreed to, and could not control. The Belgian courts, the Belgian Football Association, UEFA, and eventually FIFA lined up against him. The UEFA president at the time, a Swede named Lennart Johansson, declared, "The European Union is trying to destroy club football." Sepp Blatter, then FIFA's general secretary, framed himself, in a line that would age poorly, as a defender of the small clubs and the small players against the interests of the wealthy. In the meantime, Bosman played for clubs that went bankrupt. He was effectively blacklisted in Belgium. He could not get a proper contract anywhere, because clubs knew that taking him meant entering the legal fog surrounding his case. He played at Saint-Quentin in France, who dissolved before the season ended. He played at Saint-Denis. He played at lower division clubs in Belgium, while the lawyers filed and the courts deliberated, and the governing bodies argued that none of this was necessary, that the existing system was fine, that Jean-Marc Bosman was simply a disgruntled player who didn't understand how football worked. His marriage ended during this period. He said later, "I would have preferred it if another guy had done it in my place. It was a sacrifice I made." The European Court of Justice ruled unanimously in his favor. 2 things became law on that day. First, when a player's contract expires, they are free to leave. No transfer fee. No club permission required. They are workers, not property, and they may circulate freely like any other worker in the European Union. Second, domestic quotas restricting the number of EU players at any club are illegal. A German club could field 11 Frenchmen if it wanted to. A Spanish club could sign as many Italians as it wished. The fence built from nationality was dismantled. Once the European Court of Justice ruled that clubs no longer had to pay transfer fees after the expiration of a player's contract, one football executive said at the time, all hell broke loose. He meant it as a warning. What actually broke loose was this: players negotiating their own destinies. Steve McManaman ran down his contract at Liverpool and went to Real Madrid. He signed what was then one of the biggest contracts in football history, because Real Madrid, paying no transfer fee, could afford to put that money into his wages instead. Sol Campbell walked from Tottenham to Arsenal on a free transfer, earning signing bonuses that would previously have gone to his former club. Edgar Davids, Patrick Kluivert, Andrea Pirlo later, whole careers reshaped by the freedom to choose. Within 3 years of the ruling, player salaries in the English Premier League had increased by 40%. The agents who facilitated these negotiations became enormously more powerful, because suddenly there was a new kind of money on the table that hadn't existed before: the signing bonus, the loyalty payment, the wage that reflected what you were actually worth, rather than what your club decided to offer. Manchester United's starting 11 in the 1999 Champions League final included 8 players who would have been classified as foreigners under the rules that existed 4 years earlier. The world had changed. Completely. Permanently. Jean-Marc Bosman received £312,000 in compensation in 1998. Most of it went on legal fees, He invested some of what remained in a t-shirt business that failed. His financial situation deteriorated. He struggled with alcoholism and depression for years. In 2013, he was sent to prison following a domestic violence charge. "For me," he said in 2020, on the 25th anniversary of the ruling, "it has been 25 years of setbacks. For footballers, it was 25 years of happiness." Once in Amsterdam, he encountered the Belgian international Dries Mertens, one of many players whose career had been shaped by the freedom Bosman fought for. Mertens did not recognize him. He did not know who Jean-Marc Bosman was. There is something clarifying about that moment. Not outrageous, just clarifying. It tells you exactly how the world receives the people who change it from underneath. Not with gratitude, not with statues, usually with nothing at all. What Bosman did was not accidental heroism. He did not set out to change football. He set out to get a job he had been offered and go where he wanted to go. The heroism, if we call it that, was simply this: he refused to accept that the rule was the rule. At a time when every institution in European football told him to stop, he kept going. Every player who has ever negotiated their own next contract, every player who has waited out the final year of a deal, knowing they could choose their own future, every footballer from one European country playing freely in another, they all stand somewhere in the long shadow of a Belgian midfielder who signed for a lower division club in France and was told his wages would be cut by 3/4 for the crime of wanting to leave. He is 61 years old now. His name is in every transfer document produced by every club in Europe, even when nobody writing it thinks of him. That is not nothing. It's just not nearly enough.